Okay, so guys, the last video was a little boring, so I decided to add some music to this video, but I hope it's not too confusing. So, like I said, we're going to be applying the story elements that we just reviewed in the last video, the ones here on the right, to the story that we've been reading in class, Out of the Dust. Okay, so let's start with the two easiest story elements to figure out, which are the characters and the setting. Okay. So first off, let's start with the characters. Who are the characters, or who are the people in the story? We know, first of all, that there's a girl who's telling us the story. Her name's Billy Joe, and also other characters like Daddy, Ma, and Livy, or Billy Joe's friend who moved away. Okay. Remember to answer your answers or questions in complete sentences like I have here. Okay. Next, let's think about the where and the when, or the setting of this story. So we know, first of all, thinking about the when, pretty easily when the story takes place, because every poem ends in a date, a month, and a year. We also know, from looking up here at the table of contents, this story begins in the winter of 1934 and ends in autumn of 1935. So we can say, pretty confidently, that this, I want to make this purple again, this story takes place between 1934 and 1935. Okay, so now let's think about the where. Whoops, first of all, I want to go back to the when for a second. I want to make this point clear, that not every story has a when in it, or a date when it takes place. Think about the story Cinderella. Cinderella is a fairy tale and doesn't really take place at any time. So, when answering questions about the setting, you don't always have to answer about the when, but if you can, definitely do. Okay, now let's go to the where. Thinking about the where, we know that the Dust Bowl takes place in the southwestern United States. And also, from reading the poems, returning to them, we know that Billy Joe and her family live in this panhandle state, which we know is Oklahoma, from what we talked about in class. And then also, she lives near places like Dallas, and also sort of near to places like California. So, returning here to our sheet, we can also say confidently that this story, we wouldn't start the sentence with that, but this story also takes place in Oklahoma, or the southwestern USA, on a farm in Oklahoma, which we know is a state. Okay, so we're good with that question. Now let's move on to the more complicated part of answering questions or story elements about a story, which is called the plot. What happens in this story? So we've only really read the beginning of this story so far, so we're not really going to be able to fill this out as completely as we could if we had finished the book. But we can still figure out what happens in the beginning, and therefore, what is the problem or conflict in the story. So we know that the story takes place during the Dust Bowl, and that the Dust Bowl causes a lot of problems for Billy Joe's family. We know that because of the Dust Bowl, Daddy isn't able to grow his wheat very well, and also the Dust Bowl causes huge dust storms that cause a lot of pain and suffering for Billy Joe's family. So let's just say the Dust Bowl is the biggest problem here. We can also list some other things like poverty, and also, like we read in the most recent poem, and as we know pretty sadly, Ma's death has become a problem for Billy Joe and her dad. Now we haven't talked about the climax because we haven't read it, but we can maybe think what is going to be the most exciting thing or event in the story. Maybe Ma's death was the most exciting thing. We don't know. We haven't finished. Or it could be a migration of some sort, because we do know that people are migrating, and maybe Billy Joe and her daddy will migrate too. Now, let's think about the resolution. How could our problems, the Dust Bowl, poverty, and Ma's death, be solved? Maybe Daddy and Billy Joe will migrate. Maybe they'll migrate to California. Or maybe both of them will get over Ma's death. We don't know, but these would be ways to solve the problem that first occurred and that we've read about already. Okay, so I hope this helped in applying story elements, and next we're going to talk about what exactly you need to know